Tove Tönnies came into the world in May 2001 in Sweden. From her very first days, she was inseparable from her twin sister. The girls called the small town of Vetlanda their home, a place with barely over 10,000 residents. An atmosphere of peace and coziness reigned here, where everyone knew each other by sight. Crime was practically non-existent in this quiet corner of Sweden, so any incident instantly became the talk of the town among locals. A few years before the tragic events in question, Tova decided to leave the nest and enroll at a university in a neighboring city, located 200 kilometers from Vetlanda. The girl chose to study medicine, but already by 2022, she realized that the medical profession was not her true calling. Tova decided to take a year off from her studies to reflect on choosing a different specialty. During this period, she returned to her parents' home in Vetlanda, where she lived with her parents and twin sister. To make good use of her time, Tova got a job at a local school as a substitute teacher. This work allowed her to earn a living independently, and soon the girl was able to rent her own place. In the pedagogical field, Tova quickly won over students and colleagues. She easily found common ground with children, and the school administration highly valued her professional qualities. In addition to working at the school, the girl actively played football in the local club, which earned her considerable popularity among her fellow townspeople. Tova shared her passion for football with her twin sister. On October 15, 2022, Tova planned to have a fun night out with her girlfriends at a nightclub known for its great bar, bowling alley, and live music. There, she ran into her old acquaintances, 20-year-old Johanna Jansson and 18-year-old Maja Helmon. At one point, the three of them had been close friends, but then their paths diverged somewhat. Tova had met Johanna a few years prior at a party among mutual friends. From then on, the girls regularly attended dance events and spent a lot of time together. Johanna stood out with her bright appearance, was the life of the party, and had a wide circle of acquaintances. Maja was a bit more reserved, although she was also not deprived of attention from those around her, preferring to communicate in a narrow circle of close people. For a while, Johanna had been Maja's best friend, until Tova joined their twosome. Despite their close communication, a hidden tension sometimes arose between the girls, especially in the relationship between Johanna and Tova. As it turned out, in 2019, both had been dating the same guy, not suspecting the existence of a rival. When the truth came out, the friends quarreled, then made up again, but an unpleasant residue remained in their souls. The rivalry between the girls manifested itself particularly acutely at parties, where they openly got jealous of guys over each other. Maja tried to smooth over the rough edges, but from time to time, serious conflicts flared up between the friends, which, however, quickly subsided. In the summer of 2021, Johanna and Tova decided to rethink their attitude towards friendship, forget old grudges, and start their relationship with a clean slate. They again began to spend a lot of time together, just hanging out and chatting. But this idyll did not last long. At the beginning of 2023, a black cat ran between them again, and again because of a guy. Maja recalled that it was the biggest fight in the entire history of their friendship. Even after they resumed communication in the fall of 2022, the tension in the relationship did not go away. It was in this atmosphere of hidden confrontation that Tova met her former friends at the club on October 15. At first, the girls chatted amiably, but closer to midnight, Maja suddenly realized that she had lost sight of Johanna and Tova. The bartender hinted that they had gone outside and, apparently, a loud argument had broken out between them again. An hour later, both returned to the club, which was already closing. Visitors began to be ushered out, and the girls were forced to leave, but already on the street, a fight broke out between them. Tova even managed to send a message to her boyfriend, "Johanna hit me." Nevertheless, the friends decided not to part ways, but to try to settle the conflict. Tova had come to the party on a bicycle and was going to return on it too, not on the seat, but pushing it next to her. It was a half-hour walk to her house, and Johanna happened to live along the way. Tova suggested walking the entire distance together in order to discuss the misunderstanding in a calm atmosphere and dot all the I's. At 1:30 in the morning on October 16th, all three arrived at Johanna's house. At first, they wanted to say goodbye there, but then they decided to go inside and have some coffee as a sign of reconciliation. A few minutes later, Tova called her boyfriend, told him that she had stopped by a friend's place after the party, and assured him that everything was fine with them. Tova's voice sounded calm on the phone, but despite this, her boyfriend felt uneasy upon learning that the girl was in Johanna's apartment. He expressed concern that the friends, being together, might quarrel again and advised Tova to return home. The girl assured him that there was nothing to worry about, and that she would leave soon. That was her last conversation with her beloved. The next morning, Tova's mother tried to call her daughter, but to no avail, no one picked up the phone. They had planned to go shopping together that day. When there was no news from Tova by 10 in the morning, her family sounded the alarm. They went to the girl's house, but the door was locked from the inside. No one responded to calls or knocks. 9 hours after her daughter's last communication with her boyfriend, the mother decided to contact the police. At first, law enforcement officers were skeptical about her statement, since it concerned young girls who had visited a bar on a Saturday night. It was quite possible that they had simply had too much to drink and were now coming to their senses. But the woman insisted that this situation was absolutely atypical for her daughter and could not but arouse suspicion. The mother's persistence forced the police to take a closer look at the case. They asked the woman to tell them in more detail about the relationship between the girls lately. When information about a long-standing conflict and tension between Tova's two friends came to light, the officers began to suspect that these facts might be related to the girl's disappearance. The first thing they did was check Tova's cell phone. It turned out that it was last active around 4 in the morning on October 16th, and the signal came not from home, but from a point a few kilometers from the apartment building where the girl lived. The area near the last signal was swampy. A search party set out there, hoping to find traces of the missing person. Meanwhile, Johanna and Maja, as it turned out, were calmly staying at their homes. They were contacted on October 17th. During questioning at the police station, the friends told in detail about the events of that night, which they spent together with Tova. The investigators were particularly interested in the details of the conflict situations between the girls. Given that this couple was the last to see the missing girl alive, Johanna and Maja automatically ended up on the list of suspects. However, despite all the suspicions, the girls were released. At that moment there was no solid evidence against them. Both denied any involvement in the disappearance of their friend. They claimed that the evening had passed calmly, they had even reconciled and sat in Johanna's house after the club, and then peacefully parted ways. They had not seen Tova since then. Meanwhile, a search was conducted in the missing girl's home. Nothing suspicious was found there. It seemed that after meeting with her friends, Tova had not returned here. The next object of the search was Johanna's apartment. Renovation work was underway here, the rooms were cluttered with building materials, construction dust was everywhere. But against the background of the general disorder, the bathroom stood out, sterile clean, with a pungent smell of detergents. Another detail caught the attention of the police: a new bedsheet lay on the bed, which did not match the color of the rest of the bedding. It had obviously been purchased and put on very recently. When asked what had happened to the old linen, Johanna could not give a clear answer and refused to show it to law enforcement officers. In the kitchen, they found a roll of large black garbage bags, a liter bottle of bleach, and a container of medical alcohol. But despite all these findings, there were no signs of a fight or any violence in the apartment. No traces of blood were found either. After the search, the officers again invited Johanna and Maja for questioning. This time it took place in an official format. The girls agreed to cooperate with the investigation and calmly answered questions. Johanna displayed a particular composure. In general, the behavior of both friends seemed somewhat strange, given the circumstances of Tova's disappearance. Johanna confirmed that that evening in the bar there was indeed a conflict between her and Tova. Moreover, according to her, Tova even attacked her with her fists. Maja's version did not look so dramatic. She described the quarrel as quite aggressive, but still not as violent as Johanna portrayed it. This contradiction in the testimonies of the friends gave the detectives some food for thought. The next step was to check the geolocation data from the girls' phones. It turned out that on the eve of Tova's disappearance, all three had been together for a long time at Johanna's house. This information only strengthened the suspicions of the investigation. It seemed that the friends were either covering for each other or were accomplices in the crime. In parallel with this, the search for the missing girl continued. Dog handlers with specially trained dogs were involved in the operation. Law enforcement officers thoroughly combed a radius of 1.5 kilometers around the point where Tova's mobile signal was last recorded. It was a swampy area, and it quickly became clear that the girl would not be found here. No trace indicating her possible whereabouts was found. So the search area was expanded to the outskirts of the city. Another day passed. The official police statement about Tova's disappearance shook the entire community. Very many people knew and loved the girl. From October 19th, her photo did not leave the front pages of local newspapers, which were full of headlines about a large-scale search operation, illustrated with photos of hundreds of volunteers who joined the search. And already on October 20th, Johanna and Maja were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Despite this, both girls continued to deny their involvement and tried in every way to prove their innocence. Despite their insistence on their innocence, the girls had reason to be seriously alarmed. The police had found witnesses whose testimony shed light on the mystery of Tove Tönnies' disappearance. One of the key figures was Johanna's neighbor, whose real name was not disclosed for the sake of his safety. According to this young man, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, he heard some suspicious noise, similar to knocking, coming from the apartment of his neighbor upstairs. At first, he did not attach much importance to it, but the dull blows did not subside for over an hour. Several times he tried to get through to the girl to stop her zeal, but there was no reaction. Living directly below Johanna, the man decided to go out onto the staircase and listen more closely. The knocking continued at regular intervals, as if someone was diligently crafting something. Finally, the alarmed neighbor dared to call the girl to make sure everything was all right. After pressing the doorbell twice, he never waited for anyone to open the door. Instead, silence fell, as if the inhabitants of the apartment had fallen silent, and as soon as he was about to leave, the knocking resumed with renewed vigor, now sounding more frequent and intense. The man counted about 12 dull blows in a row, after which complete silence reigned. It seemed that the source of the sound was in the area of the bathroom. Returning to his floor and already unlocking the door, the neighbor heard the lock click upstairs. It was Johanna. Going down the stairs, the girl smiled affably and apologized for the late-night noise. Johanna explained that a friend had come to visit her, with whom they had drunk a lot. Having overdone it with alcohol, the guest felt unwell and was throwing up in the bathroom, which the girl used to explain the mysterious sounds that had disturbed the neighbor for an hour and a half. Despite his confusion, Johanna assured that there would be no more noise, saying that her friend was feeling much better and had lain down to rest on the sofa. Johanna herself was going to have a snack at the 24-hour McDonald's. Hearing this, the neighbor kindly offered to give her a ride and keep her company. The girl readily agreed. At the moment when they left the front door, it was about 4 in the morning. A bicycle immediately caught the eye, carelessly parked right in the middle of the driveway. Moving it to the fence so as not to interfere, the neighbor asked whose transport it was. Johanna replied that her friend had left it, perhaps out of spite or forgetting to park the bicycle neatly. Concerned about the condition of the guest, the man repeatedly asked Johanna if everything was all right. After all, the sounds he had heard seemed too specific to be nausea, and lasted too long. Worried about whether medical help was needed, the neighbor did not let up, but the girl kept reassuring him, saying that everything was fine now. Eventually, she just changed the subject, apparently not wanting to talk about the friend who was currently resting at her house, according to her. Then the young people silently ate burgers, and Johanna did not forget to grab one with her for the guest. Interestingly, the next day the bicycle that had been standing near the house disappeared without a trace. Johanna told her neighbor that her friend had recovered and, upon waking up, had ridden it home. Talking to the police, the man especially emphasized how strange the girl's behavior seemed to him, especially against the backdrop of the alarming headlines about the disappearance of Tova, who, by the way, was riding a two-wheeler. So the detectives set about meticulously studying the data from Johanna's mobile phone. They managed to establish that the trip to the 24-hour McDonald's was not the only one for her that night. But the most interesting thing was that in addition to the movements of Johanna's phone itself, law enforcement officers were surprised to find an identical route for Tova's mobile phone. When asked directly, the girl admitted that she had indeed taken the missing friend's phone with her to the cafe, but the friend herself was not with her. At the same time, she could not explain why she needed someone else's gadget. However, the police were already thinking that it was Johanna who could have turned off Tova's phone in order to avoid the possibility of tracking her movements. According to geolocation data, at 3:56 a.m., having returned from McDonald's, the girl got behind the wheel again. A few minutes later, her car was recorded by the cameras of the nearest gas station, from where she headed to the forest area north of Vetlanda. The journey to the destination should have taken about half an hour. Interestingly, the next day Johanna visited the area again, which only increased the suspicions of the cops. Moreover, it was in that area that the missing girl's phone was last spotted. The police immediately sent search teams to comb the forest zone. And 2 weeks later, Tove Tönnies' body was found in those places. Of course, this did not look like a coincidence at all. On November 2nd, one of the detachments surveyed a wooded area near a swampy section near the city. 8 meters from the path, under the forest litter, their attention was attracted by something suspicious. The soil in that place was clearly disturbed, charred rags of rubbish and some black polyethylene garbage lay around. Examination showed that these bags were identical to those found in Johanna's house during the search. Under a thick layer of earth and ash, mutilated human remains were discovered, which could only be identified thanks to dental records. The body was wrapped in a sheet, the same one that was recognized in the home of the main suspect by a specific pattern. And on top, the same garbage bags. The location of the improvised burial indicated that the killers had deliberately turned off the usual paths into the depths of the forest so that random witnesses would not stumble upon a trace of their monstrous crime. It was there that they burned the body of the unfortunate Tove Tönnies. Forensic experts were lucky to find many more incriminating pieces of evidence. In particular, several empty bottles of medical alcohol. Obviously, it was going to be used to light the fire as well as possible. Interestingly, the same ones were found among Johanna's belongings during the search. But her reckless actions did not end there. The police found out that immediately after committing the murder, and also the next day, the girl visited one of the hardware stores in Vetlanda. Video surveillance cameras recorded how Johanna bought a new sheet, a canister of gasoline and 3 bottles of medical alcohol. Subsequently, all these items were found at the scene of the burning of the body in the forest. In order to gather as much evidence as possible against Johanna, the cops carefully studied the history of her internet searches. Back in January, she was actively Googling information about how to commit murder and get rid of a corpse, what punishments for such crimes were provided for by Swedish law, and how to behave in women's colonies. It turned out that the girl had been purposefully preparing for this crime for almost a whole year. So, in view of the totality of the evidence, Johanna Jansson and Maja Helmon were officially charged with committing first-degree murder and attempting to conceal the traces of the crime. The earth embraced the body of Tove Tönnies, a young life cut short prematurely. But the memory of her will live on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. More than 200 people gathered on the football field of the club in the girl's hometown to honor her bright image. It was here, from early childhood, that Tova had kicked the ball around, growing as a person and an athlete. Grateful fellow townspeople released dozens of lanterns into the night sky, as if trying to reach out to the soul of their favorite. While the community mourned the deceased, the investigation did not stop working. Suspicions about Johanna Jansson and Maja Helmon only intensified. The autopsy of Tova's body revealed new evidence that spoke eloquently against them. The detectives increased the psychological pressure on the young girls. And it bore fruit. All of Sweden, holding its breath, followed the course of the investigation of the resonant crime. And then, on December 2nd, one of the suspects gave up. 18-year-old Maja, feeling the unbearable burden of guilt, volunteered to cooperate with the investigation. She dared to tell her version of the events of that fateful night that the 3 of them spent in Johanna's apartment. According to Maja, soon after the girls crossed the threshold of the dwelling, a quarrel broke out again between Johanna and Tova. Maja herself, tired of the endless squabbles of her friends, tried to calm them down. But when the fervor subsided a little, she, exhausted, went to bed, covering her head with a pillow. In the middle of the night, Maja was suddenly awakened by Johanna. Rubbing her eyes, the girls saw a horrifying picture. Tova was lying motionless in the hallway. Maja swore up and down that she had no idea what had happened. After all, according to Johanna, Tova had simply slipped in the bathroom, hit her head, and lost consciousness. The girls rushed to their friend, but her pulse could no longer be felt. Horrified, they realized, Tova was dead. Overwhelmed by panic, Maja and Johanna decided to get rid of the body. However, a few weeks passed, and Johanna also decided to play frank with the investigation. Her story differed somewhat from Maja's version. Johanna admitted that she had quarreled with Tova, but then, when passions had subsided a little, she wanted to defuse the situation. The apartment had just finished renovating the bathroom, the only room where there was no construction clutter. That's where the girl led her friend, hoping to surprise her with cleanliness and coziness. Instead, according to Johanna, Tova took offense even more. There was nothing special to look at there. The offended hostess pushed the guest, who lost her balance and fell. Johanna claimed that she just wanted to help her friend get up and ask if everything was okay. But instead of gratitude, Tova grabbed her by the throat, strangling her with unexpected force. Fighting for a breath of air, Johanna also grabbed the attacker by the neck. A sharp pain forced Tova to let go of the hostess. The girl claimed that Maja, hearing the desperate struggle, ran to separate her friends. But by the time she managed to pull Tova away, she was no longer breathing. Johanna described further events in much the same way as Maja. Frightened, the friends decided to hide the traces of the terrible incident. While pondering a plan of action, a neighbor stopped by, alarmed by the nighttime noise. Johanna went out to him, dispelling suspicion, and at the same time had a snack at McDonald's. Returning home, she found a way to get rid of Tova's bicycle. The girls wrapped their friend's body in a plain household sheet, and on top they stuffed it into dense polyethylene garbage bags. Johanna went to the hardware store for bottles of alcohol and gasoline. Maja and Johanna carried the burden of guilt out of the apartment together, loaded it into the trunk of the car and took it to the forest. In the clearing, they doused the body with an accelerant and set it on fire. The fire was supposed to erase the traces, but the flames seemed too weak to destroy the remains. Johanna had to go to the store a second time, buy more gasoline and repeat the attempt. However, despite the sincere confessions, in the eyes of experienced detectives, the stories of Maja and Johanna looked unconvincing. Johanna's version seemed especially absurd, as if the fragile Tova had suddenly attacked her like an enraged fury. All the facts testified to the opposite, the hot-tempered nature of Johanna herself and the peace-loving disposition of her victim. Moreover, the testimonies of the two suspects differed too much in the details. And yet, Johanna's confession, albeit under the guise of self-defense, gave good reason to accuse the girl of committing a serious crime. Maja, on the other hand, denied everything. She did not separate anyone, but peacefully slept in the room, and had no idea how the murder happened. Moreover, Maja claimed that when she saw the lifeless body of her friend, Johanna did not look shocked or frightened by her involuntary heroism at all. On the contrary, the girl seemed very pleased with the result. So Maja felt in her gut that Tova's death was no accident. On March 27, 2023, the trial in the case of the murder of Tove Tönnies began. On the dock were 20-year-old Johanna Jansson and 18-year-old Maja Helmon. The courtroom was more crowded than ever. Half of Sweden watched the course of this high-profile case with bated breath. The brutality of the crime committed did not fit in the heads of ordinary citizens. The version of the prosecutors was unambiguous: both girls were lying. Investigators were inclined to believe that on the fateful night, in a fit of anger, Johanna and Maja together knocked Tova to the floor. Maja held the victim while Johanna strangled her friend. Covering their tracks, the girls took the body to the forest, doused it with gasoline and set it on fire. At home, they thoroughly washed the bathroom. But even there, forensic experts managed to detect the DNA of both the victim and the killers. The defense also had something to say. The lawyers convinced the jury that the degree of Maja's guilt was much less. She did not directly participate in the murder. At most, she held Tova while she resisted. Later, she helped her friend clean up the crime scene and remove the body. And also, the defenders repeatedly emphasized, the girl had just turned 18, so she simply could not resist the influence of the older and more willful Johanna. And this is despite the fact that the examination unequivocally named the cause of Tova's death as strangulation. Johanna's lawyers insisted that their client had become a victim of an unfortunate coincidence. The girl acted within the framework of necessary self-defense, and Maja was sleeping in another room altogether. Johanna herself could never have overpowered Tova, who trained regularly and was in excellent physical shape. Having heard all the arguments of the parties, the jury went to deliberate. The chief prosecutor was noticeably nervous, although he believed that, given the severity of the charges brought, the defendants had every chance of getting a minimal punishment. However, his pessimism turned out to be in vain. The court found both Johanna Jansson and Maja Helmon guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was unexpectedly severe, life imprisonment. There were no precedents in Sweden for such a punishment to be imposed on girls under the age of 21. But despite the ironclad evidence of the guilt of the defendants, discussions about the fairness of the verdict do not subside to this day. The problem is that we will never know the truth for certain. Suppose one of the prisoners is telling the truth. But what if they're both lying? The only person who knew exactly what happened that night is dead. However, the lawyers of the convicts did not lose hope, they filed an appeal. During this time, new details surfaced. A year before the tragedy, Johanna had written several poems imbued with hatred for Tova and her twin sister. Later, the girl, together with an accomplice, even tried to burn down the house where the Itonen family lived. Fortunately, the fire was quickly localized. The doors were seriously damaged, but the building and people were not hurt. It turns out that Johanna repeatedly promised her friends that sooner or later she would send Tova to the next world with her own hands. For her, it was something like an obsessive idea. So the girl's motive left no doubt. A few months later, the Court of Appeal did revise the verdict against Maja. The girl was acquitted of murder charges due to lack of evidence. Instead, she was found guilty of concealing a crime and obstructing justice. As a result, Maja was sentenced to 1 year of probation. On December 31, 2023, the girl was already at large. But the appeal did not help Johanna. Except that it softened the sentence, 16 years in prison. Most were inclined to believe that the girl had dealt with Tova on her own. Johanna will have to spend most of her life behind bars. She will be able to be released no earlier than at the age of 36. But even finding herself in places of deprivation of liberty, Johanna continues to insist on the version of self-defense. Feeling the hopelessness of her situation, closer to the new year, the girl, together with another prisoner, tried to escape from prison. The plan of the fugitives was rather bold, to take one of the employees of the institution hostage, and then go beyond the gate. Fortunately, the plan was revealed at the preparation stage. But even for this, Johanna Jansson will certainly bear additional responsibility. After all, an attempt to escape from places of detention is also a crime. However, it seems that the prospect of spending most of her life behind bars has made the girl absolutely desperate. This story is a vivid example of how seemingly strong friendships can suddenly turn into fierce hatred. How the inability to forgive old grievances, exacerbated by rivalry and love, pushes people to terrible crimes. Unfortunately, similar cases are not so rare. But they always deeply shock society, especially when it comes to young girls who have barely begun to live. The Tova Itonen case will go down in the history of Swedish criminology as one of the most high-profile and resonant. That's all for now. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any future content. Take care and goodbye.